Hi, everyone. So this week we're changing pace a little bit. In the previous parts of the course, we've looked at theories of what the good life is. We looked at theories of what distinguishes right from wrong action. We've looked at particular questions about whether certain behaviors are morally acceptable, permissible, or required. Well, in this week, we're going to turn to a discussion of how might those ethical ideas be connected to religion. All right, so are there any areas of overlap between ethical theory and religious ideas? In this video, we'll talk about morality and religion specifically, and so we'll distinguish between theism, atheism, and agnosticism. Then I'll introduce a view known as traditional theism, and then I'll talk about potential connections to ethics. And we'll talk about three potential connections that people try to make in terms of moral motivation, moral guidance, and as the sort of source of morality. So let's start just by distinguishing three views that it's important to understand for this discussion: theism, atheism, and agnosticism. Now, these are not the only sort of views that you could distinguish, and these are not the only ways to even make these three distinctions, but the way that I'm going to present them is going to sort of be helpful for framing the discussion that we're going to be focusing on. So theism you can think of as the belief that there exists a personal God or gods. So monotheism would believe in a single God, polytheism would believe in the existence of multiple gods. Atheism is the belief that God does not exist. Lastly, agnosticism then is a psychological state where someone withholds belief about God's existence or non-existence. So the agnostic is someone who just doesn't have a belief one way or the other. They sort of remain neutral. They think maybe God exists, maybe God doesn't. I don't have a belief one way or the other. In the same way, this is the attitude I take towards aliens. I don't believe that there are aliens, but I also don't believe that there aren't aliens. I sort of am agnostic about that. I'm sort of waiting until more evidence comes in. So obviously we can't talk about every single religious view, and our purpose here isn't to sort of adjudicate between the various religions. So I'm just going to introduce what you might call traditional theism, mainly because it'll give us a framework for discussing the issues we'll be focusing on. And secondly, the views I introduce have at least been highly influential within especially sort of US culture. So traditional theism you can think of as the belief in the existence of exactly one God that is responsible for creating the universe and everything in it, including us human beings. And this God has the following features. This God is omnipotent or all-powerful, omniscient or all-knowing, omnibenevolent or all-good or morally perfect. All right, so with regard to omnipotent, you can think potent, like a potent smell is a strong smell. That'll help you remember all-powerful. Omniscient, the last part kind of looks like science. Science is associated maybe with knowledge, so all-knowing. Bene, in the last word here, is the root word for good. So you have all good or morally perfect. All right, so now, over the course of this semester, we've discussed the morality of various kinds of behavior. However, you might find it odd that none of the arguments that we've looked at have made any kind of appeal to religious ideas in trying to settle sort of what the morally right or wrong action is. And now, but when you look at our culture, many people explicitly appeal to religious texts and traditions rather than any kind of abstract philosophical argument when they're developing or defending their ethical beliefs in public. So, for instance, abortion is a huge ethical controversy within our own society, and many people cite their religion rather than any abstract philosophical argument to explain why they have their beliefs about the ethics of abortion. So you might, for instance, hear a religious person give the following argument that your book introduces, what we might call the argument from religious authority. So it says, if the Bible prohibits abortion, then abortion is immoral. Well, the Bible does prohibit abortion, therefore abortion is immoral. Now, we're not going to assess this argument in this video. My purpose in presenting it here is just to illustrate the fact that you might see people make this kind of connection when trying to explain their views. They will appeal to their religious texts or traditions to sort of try to back them up. Now, moreover, we are not in this sort of section of the course, we're not going to attempt to assess the truth of any specific religion. So we're not going to question, like, is there evidence for the existence of God? Is there evidence against the existence of God? How should we distinguish between the various religions? That's not our purpose. However, given that many people turn to religion when discussing ethics, it's incumbent upon us to consider at least what kind of connection might exist between religion and ethics, if you do have those beliefs. And it's also important because, as I said, like you probably noticed, the ethical theories and reason we focused on throughout this course attempt to make progress in ethics without appealing to any specific religious claims. And so that calls out for explanation. Why are those philosophers trying to do so much work without appealing to religion? Is that a conscious choice on their part? And if so, why do they do so? Especially when we see that religion seems to play such a huge role in ethical discourse within our society. So there's numerous different ways that someone might try to make a connection between their religious ideas and their ethical ideas. And we're only going to discuss 3 common connections people might try to make. And of those 3, we're actually just going to focus most of our attention on just one of them. But the 3 that we'll at least briefly consider are connections people try to make between religion and moral motivation, moral guidance, and as a source of morality. So regarding moral motivation, it's sometimes suggested that religious belief provides persons with motivation to do the right thing and to live a good life. Because look, even if you know the right thing to do, oftentimes it's tempting to do the wrong thing, because you might be able to benefit yourself by doing something immoral. And sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes it comes at great sacrifice to do something good or right. And so we want to make sure that people actually have motivation. So it's one thing to know the right thing to do, and it's another thing to be sort of successfully motivate yourself to get yourself to do the right thing. And sometimes people think that religious belief can help provide that needed motivation. Regarding moral guidance, this has more to do not with motivation, but with sort of knowledge, sort of with advice about how to do the right thing. So it's sometimes argued that religion provides an especially secure form of moral guidance for teaching us how we ought to live. Because oftentimes it's unclear to us and we're unsure. Sometimes we face moral dilemmas where we just don't know what to do or how to resolve conflicting obligations that we have. And so sometimes, look, I might turn to, say, my parents for advice because I think they have a lot more experience than me about certain sort of issues and aspects. And so I turn to them for advice or moral guidance to help me figure out my way through that difficult situation. Similarly, someone might think, just like I turn to my parents, other people think you can turn to God or religious texts and traditions to help give you that advice or guidance for how to resolve that tricky situation. Lastly, it's sometimes thought that God can play an important ethical role in explaining where morality comes from. On this view, God might serve a special role as the creator of morality to sort of explain how it got here or why it has its authority. So we're going to focus most of our attention on this third one. The first 2 will come up later in the week very briefly, but most of our attention is going to be on a discussion of why do people think that God could provide a source of morality, and what kinds of arguments could they give, and what kind of challenges can be sort of levied against that kind of position. So that's it for this video. I'll see you next time when we're going to actually introduce the divine command theory and some of the motivations for it. See you then.